Thanks for letting me know, guys.
You got your masks on, everybody?
Yeah.
All right, I'm taking mine off so they can see who I am. Good morning. Thank you for coming out. So to start things off, I need to say, where are we right now? Well, the votes have not been counted. We need to make sure the votes are counted to see where we are. The reality is about 70 some odd thousand votes were cast on election day. More than that is outstanding, has not been counted. More than 50% of the votes have not been counted, at least. Thousands of votes came in yesterday to Erie County. Thousands of votes. So it is not just premature, it would be irresponsible to declare victory, as Mr. Jacobs has done. It would be equally irresponsible for me to claim defeat or to submit, which I will not do until all the votes are counted. And regardless, we are continuing forward to November. I need to remind everybody, this was a primary day for the Republican Party. There was 3 Republicans on the ballot. Dwayne, there was Ms. Parlato, Mr. Mihailu, Mr. Jacobs. There was 1 Democrat on the ballot, and that was me. Now, we have to talk about some things that happened on Election Day. There was confusion about the election, general confusion by the public, because it was a very unusual election. Beyond that, there was confusion about how to submit an absentee ballot. Many people did not receive their absentee ballots. We received thousands of complaints regarding people who never received a ballot and were uncomfortable or unable to go to the polls. And there was confusion at the polls themselves. People went to the polls and either were told they could not vote or had to fill out an affidavit to vote. There were problems. There were serious issues. Now, we know that in any election, an old strategy is to declare victory before the election's over. We saw Chris Collins do it a few years ago, and it threw me off then, and I've learned from that you do not submit until you count every single vote. And with more than 50% of the votes uncounted, we will not give up until we make sure that every vote is counted, and we're going to go in there prepared to count everyone. We know the preponderance of the votes that have been sent by mail were by people who believed in the COVID virus, people who were worried about voting in person. Just out of curiosity, we haven't done a check. How many of the people behind me voted by mail? Most of the people that we speak to, most of the people on our side voted by mail. So I will guarantee you this. The gap will significantly shorten, and there's the possibility of victory that still remains when you have that many votes outstanding. And we know the majority of those votes are from Democratic voters. So we will wait until July 7th to make any decisions about the special election. Again, I think what Mr. Jacobs did is not only irresponsible, I think it's reflective of where we are as a nation. It's a Trump strategy. I'm afraid it's the strategy that we're going to see employed again in November, where Americans are used to hearing results on Election Day. But where you have more mail-in ballots and the process is prolonged, you're going to see people try to claim victory prematurely and irresponsibly. And I believe that's what Mr. Jacobs is doing. Beyond that, I want to talk about the Trump factor itself. We know the week lining up to the election, Mr. Trump and his family were heavily involved in this election. They did town halls, multiple town halls. They did robocalls endlessly. And these robocalls and town halls were not just powerful because of the base that votes on a primary day. They were powerful because they were filled with lies. And we have the media here, many members of the local media. And I have to ask you to hold these people accountable. President Trump had a town hall the eve of the election where he said that I raised New Yorkers' taxes, where he said that I lobbied for foreign trade deals that hurt our country. A lie that's been repeated for years by the Republican Party and by those involved in politics. He lied about my position on open borders. He said I believe in open borders and I'm an open borders advocate. And numerous other lies. He also praised the Delaware North Company. And you know I have an issue with them right now, as do many other members of our community who've been laid off by them without almost any notice and taken away their health care. Can you imagine the absurdity of myself being in the situation where I was sitting with my family, worrying about my healthcare situation, what's next for our family, as I listened to a broadcast by our president saying that I was some type of despicable human being that sent jobs overseas? These are blatant lies. Now, we can talk about it or we can just pretend it didn't happen. And I ask the press to talk about it. When you have the President of the United States, the person that many people voted for and believe in, interfering with an election with malicious lies, is this a story? Is this news to you? I certainly hope it is. Now, beyond that, we know that I ran an openly anti-Trump campaign, so he had a vested interest to stop me, and I will remain anti-Trump. I think President Trump is a threat to America and to the values I hold dear. And I think those who team with President Trump are complicit in that threat. I believe that threat will be defeated in November. And regardless of what happens in the special election, as you see the gap narrow, and I promise you it will narrow, every vote that we receive is a punch towards Trumpism and what it represents. And you see the stats, you see the polls in our country. Now, whether Western New York wants to be part of the right side of history or not, we'll find out in November. But I can guarantee you that President Trump is going to lose in November. And I will proudly stand against him until that time. And I would hope the media here would hold Chris Jacobs and those who have lied with him accountable. Think about the commercials he put out there, the hundreds of thousands of dollars he spent on commercials. And I should add, look at how much we are outspent in this race. If we come even close in the special election on the same days of primary, that should be a wake-up call for all those who are still on the Trump bandwagon, that he is in trouble in November. And I'm going to say it again, he is going to lose in November because the people behind me are going to stand strong and we are going to work, and the people across this great country who believe in the values of America are going to stand strong against President Trump. Last thing I will say to you, and then I'll answer your questions if you have any. I ask you that don't let Chris Jacobs pivot. Do not let him somehow pretend he's suddenly a moderate. He is not a moderate. He stood with President Trump at the height of a pandemic. He stood with President Trump as President Trump openly advocated for the Confederate flag. He is not a moderate. He praised President Trump on Election Day, saying, "Thank you for this victory." If you tie yourself to Trump, you sink with Trump. And when he tries to pivot back to the middle, the people of Western New York, hopefully led by the media, who will hold him accountable, which is your duty to do so, will remind the people of Western New York the values that Chris Jacobs and his family have stood for over the last year. The values that I defy. Hold him accountable. And with that, I'll answer any questions that you may have.
Nate, were you upset that you didn't get a lot of support from the higher-ups in the Democratic Party? I think back to your campaign a couple of years ago, you had Joe Biden come out here and sing your praises. Here we have the presidential candidate of the United States, and he's nowhere to be found for the special election.
Well, it's hard when you're running and President Trump and his son are doing robocalls against you and you don't have that same type of backup on your side. I'm not going to lie, it's tough. You'd like to have some support from your side. But I think, if you can see the support we have from grassroots supporters, regular people, and we have a lot of support. And I know this district was gerrymandered to let somebody win, even Chris Collins win. But if you look at the support we have from across the district, from NY25 and NY26 included, most of the people in this region, the majority of this people in this region, the good people of this region, the good people of Western New York, are on the right side of history. And I'm going to ask them to compel their friends and family in NY27 over the next 4 months to push away against the lies of the Trump family and the lies of the Jacobs family. I'm going to ask them to do that. Now, I'm excited about the next 4 months. I think this is going to be a great turning point for our country. And I'm proud to be on the right side of history. Now, do I wish we had more support from Washington? Absolutely. But I feel pretty good about the support we do have. and the campaign that we do have and the people that are with us. And I'm so proud of the support that we did receive. And by the way, that's another lie that President Trump said. He said, I'm a hand-picked puppet of Nancy Pelosi. Well, clearly I'm not, because if I was, where is she? I don't know Nancy Pelosi. I met her once. I don't know any of the Democratic establishment. I am a complete political outsider. But I'll tell you what, it's interesting that President Trump knows who I am and that he was so active to try to fight against me. He got involved in this election. His base, which is who voted on Tuesday? His base. His base is with him. I'm not going to deny that. I wish they weren't. It seems like we don't look at logic or reason anymore for some people. But his base is with him. But most of us and most of America is not. Most of America has seen through the show. They look behind the curtain, and they see the wizard as a joke.
And Jacob said on election night, if you were to concede, he could get into Washington, get sworn in, get representing the district sooner. Are you worried about that for a district that hasn't been represented since October of last year?
It's a good question, Ryan, and I wish we did have representation, but I'm not sure he's ever going to give us representation. How could a man who openly sided with President Trump and lied to our district, deliberately misled our district? Remember, I worked for his family. He knows what kind of person I am. He knows I didn't send jobs overseas or negotiate fake trade deals. He knows. So he's a person that's a liar. And I know that's words not thrown around very much in politics, but he's a liar. And he sided with a liar, a deceiver. I don't want that type of person representing NY27. We've had enough of that. I do not want him representing us. He's someone who's voted against health care. He's someone who voted against COVID sick pay. And when you see him next, I ask everyone in this room to say to him, when you say you stand with Trump, do you stand with the Confederate flag? Do you stand with what they did last night, trying to take away health care for Americans in the middle of a pandemic? Do you stand with reducing testing for COVID? Ask him what he really means when he says that. We know he stands against Black Lives Matter. He said that. Get him on the record so that in the years to come, if this person ever tries to run again, we'll know who he is. Right now, he just says he stands with Trump. Get him to say what that exactly means. But I don't want him representing NY27, period. I think he has disgraced himself, he's dishonored his family, and he's dishonored his family's name.
Hey, earlier this week when you and I spoke, if I recall your words, folks have had enough of Trump's act. Over the next few weeks and months, as we see continuing developments in COVID spikes in other states and with social protests, do you feel that many in NY27, do you feel that there may even be more of a growth of that opinion in NY27?
You're going to see the race tighten, and if we don't pull it off, it'll be closer than anyone predicted. And the Trump factor is powerful in NY27, especially in a Republican primary. I'm not going to lie. That's why Jacobs killed his Republican foes so badly. He destroyed them, right? And we know that's the same base. But in a general election, we're going to have 100,000 more voters, right? Approximately 100,000 more voters. You're going to see that we don't have to narrow the margin that much. And I can guarantee you President Trump is not going to win in November. So our new congressman, if he is in fact elected, hitched himself to someone who is going to go down in disgrace as one of the worst presidents in history. He credited that president with his so-called victory, which we're not even sure about because more than 50% of the votes have not been counted yet. That's a damning thing for him to have done. And voters have a long memory, and they will see where this goes. But I do think in November you're going to see a very different electorate, and we're very confident about where we're headed. Look, I'm excited about the next 4 months because when you're doing what you think is right and when you feel like you're on the right side of history, it's all good. It's all good, and we're fighting for what's right. I would not want to be in Chris Jacobs' shoes. I think that in the years to come, standing with President Trump today is like standing with George Wallace in 1968. It is not a good move.
Nate, can you tell us what your strategy is for the canvas of these absentee ballots? Obviously, I know you'll want to be very involved in that. What are you looking for as those absentees are rolling?
It's a good question. Thank you. Well, listen, we were involved in it last time, and I think if the regular people knew how this process works, they'd be shocked. It's incredibly labor intensive, and I want to thank the members of the Board of Elections that are out there that are working so hard. I know how difficult this is, and we have to invest in our voting infrastructure, and we have to invest in There has to be changes that are made. When I ran against Chris Collins, we went through it. It is a miserable process. And that time we were dealing with less than 20,000 absentee ballots. And this time we're dealing with possibly 100,000 absentee ballots. That's a huge number. So we are going to have people assigned at every single location to watch the process, to make sure that every vote is counted correctly and nothing is thrown away. The Jacobs family, I mean, they have unlimited resources. They are going to lawyer up big time, we know that. And we are, we're doing our best to fundraise to support this effort ourselves to make sure these votes are counted the correct way. But it just comes down to the simple process of making sure that we have somebody on the spot that's reviewing each and every ballot along with the Board of Election staff. And I think the Board of Election staff does their best to do it correctly and with dignity and with integrity. It is just a very, very difficult process. And so we'll have our people there watching and making sure that it's done, that everything is recorded and documented correctly.
Can you elaborate on what you mean when you say you're fundraising to make sure that this stays fair? What are some of the things you might be looking to spend that money on?
Elections attorneys. Elections attorneys to make sure that that the rights of the voters. Here's the big thing. When we're talking about possibly 100,000 votes that have not been counted and someone declaring victory, Chris Jacobs is denying the vote of seniors who are afraid of COVID and showing up in person, of the military personnel who voted, of the thousands and thousands of Western New Yorkers who for very valid reasons could not vote in person. So it is not only suppressing the vote, it is disenfranchising people who deserve their vote to be counted. So what I'm talking about is making sure that there are not additional steps taken to deprive anyone of having their voice be heard. So making sure lawyers are there and that election rules are followed, and that we make sure that when a vote is just cast away for any particular reason, it's done for correct reasons. And we want to make sure that every single vote is tabulated.
Do you expect lawsuits that some of this will go to a judge, and we hear people talking about not getting their absentee ballot or getting an absentee ballot without postage, that they're going to challenge if they didn't get their chance to vote this election?
I don't want to do that. If we have to, we will. Now, if we do it, it's going only to help us protect us in November. Because I think there's some things that need to be worked out here. I mean, we have people up here who have family members or individuals themselves who never received an absentee ballot. Or it's people that received it today. Just today, we heard this morning, people were telling us we just received our absentee ballot. So we have to figure out a way to clear up the confusion. I don't blame necessarily the Board of Elections. A lot of these Board of Elections, there's a few people. Like if you go to Niagara County or Wyoming County, it's a couple people. They don't have tons of manpower. And they were left by the governor, frankly, and the entire system to fend for themselves. But we have to make sure that whatever we learn from the special election and the bad things that did occur, they don't get carried over into November. If that means I have to bring a lawsuit to bring something to light, I will do so. I'm not afraid to do that. One of the things we had problems with in Erie County, as you know, is early voting was completely mishandled. The locations were changed. No one knew where the locations were. We brought a lawsuit. We brought a lawsuit 2 weeks after the date when early voting was supposed to start. Because early voting usually, historically, favors Democrats. And we're like, look, they're not even trying to do early voting. So we brought a lawsuit. The next day, they put some early voting locations up on their website. Unfortunately, we live in an era where this is so much in flux and so much is changing that we do have to take legal action occasionally. We're going to try to avoid it, but if there's something that shows that the rights of the people that we represent or hope to represent have been violated, we will take legal action. Any other questions? I'll finish with this then. I thank you to the people of Western New York for paying attention to this. Thank you to those who voted. We will make sure your votes are cast. And for everyone else, November, get ready for November. Whether we win or lose, this is going to it's going to move like a blink of an eye. And we need to be prepared for November. If you want a man who stood with President Trump and President Trump's lies in this period of absolute crisis in our country, what kind of crisis? We have a crisis of mass division in our country. We have a health crisis, and we have a financial crisis with millions of people out of work with little hope in sight. If you want to stand with a man responsible for such causes and then lies about me, a person that never did any of the things President Trump accused me of, go ahead. But I know these people And the good people of this region, many of the good people of this region will stand with me. And we will defeat Jacobs and we will defeat Trump in November. Thank you.